phrase that has been used. It's called noble cause corruption, where the police think they know who is guilty and they will use any means necessary to achieve a conviction of those they consider to be guilty. Putting it at its most generous, it is an arrogance within our police service, which appears to think that they know what's best in the interests of the rule of law, and if they have to bend the rule of law to protect it, they will do so. That is what happened here. That is what happens in a number of other serious miscarriages that we've seen.
Clear opportunities to intervene had been missed. Jane Sawyers set the terms of reference for the Costello investigation, but says she didn't see the completed report back in 2007. However, she agrees it ought to have been disclosed and thinks she could have taken more of an interest in its findings.
There was an awful mistake in the report not being disclosed, with terrible consequences. It absolutely should have been disclosed. There is no question about that at all.
A lot of people say that now. Why didn't it happen at the time? There were people like you, your senior officers. Couldn't you have been more professionally curious about this? Couldn't you have taken action? There was an opportunity to intervene.
Yeah, and the simple answer to that is yes. Hindsight's great, isn't it? But I could have been more intrusive. Other people could have been more intrusive. Some people thought other people had done it. There was no national policy in relation to disclosure about, other than the investigating officer and the disclosure officer, about who was responsible for disclosing that document and about who knew its contents. It was a terrible mistake.
After the appeal, the Kalmia investigation continued solely under the direction of the IPCC. It set out to determine whether any police officers should face misconduct or even criminal charges. The 4 senior officers had moved up the ranks since the Costello report 5 years earlier. In 2012, Adrian Lee was Chief Constable in Northamptonshire, Suzette Davenport was his deputy, but would soon be promoted to be Chief in Gloucestershire. Jane Sawyers was about to become Chief Constable in Staffordshire, and Marcus Beale was an Assistant Chief Constable in the West Midlands with responsibility for counter-terrorism. Mick Creedon and his team completed the next stage of Operation Kalmia in 2014 and concluded that while there was no evidence of corruption, all 4 had failed in their duties and so did have a case to answer for gross misconduct.
We looked at the terms of reference, we investigated, we gathered the evidence, and we worked on the balance of probabilities, and there were conflicting accounts and conflicting evidence. And all I ever said was, in the case of the chief officers, we found there was a case to answer.
Jane Sawyers is adamant that the conclusion was wrong.
There was no evidence of any omission or cover-up. There was evidence of serious mistakes and things that went wrong. The investigation took years, and nobody is ultimately held to account, which either says that the investigation didn't uncover whose fault it was, or actually it wasn't an individual who was ultimately responsible. It was a set of circumstances.
The IPCC told what are known as the appropriate authorities that senior officers should be subject to misconduct hearings. In the cases of the 3 chief constables, that was their police and crime commissioners. They all sent the report back with a list of objections. They disagreed with the conclusions of the report and didn't think any of the senior officers, Lee, Davenport, Sawyers and Beale, should face misconduct hearings. The PCC for Staffordshire is Matthew Ellis. At the time, Jane Sawyers was his temporary chief constable.
It absolutely wasn't her finest time in police work, and she should have been more curious and she should have been more robust in actually getting to the bottom of some of the issues that she saw.
So it was a cock-up, not a conspiracy?
I would say it was mainly a cock-up, not a conspiracy. It was a dysfunctional organisation in parts at that time, all those years ago, but it was not misconduct or gross misconduct, and it wasn't even close to it based on the evidence provided.
In the Court of Appeal, the judge said that there appeared that there might have been a serious perversion of the course of justice. If Jane Sawyers wasn't responsible, then who was?
I'm not an investigator. I was asked, and by law, I look at one particular part of the investigation. Something went wrong. Nobody's been held to account for something going wrong. None of this is good for any part, but no, I'm not about to start reinvestigating it.
Ultimately, Mr. Ellis backed Jane Sawyers for the top job and made her the permanent Chief Constable of Staffordshire. Matters dragged on. The IPCC withdrew some of its recommendations and sent a revised Kalmia report back to the appropriate authorities. After taking further legal advice, all of them, in Staffordshire, Northamptonshire, Gloucestershire and the West Midlands, took a similar view. Agreeing there'd been a collective failure, they all said that there was no evidence which could point to an individual being held responsible, and so none of the senior officers faced misconduct charges, including Suzette Davenport.
Well, as the report says, it was a collective failing, and the proposition that we'd all conspired to pervert the course of justice was just wrong.
I think one of the things that everyone has criticised Staffordshire Police for is this collective failing to disclose the Costello report. Why do you think it wasn't passed on?
I honestly can't say. I can't speak for other people. I cannot count the amount of times that I have wished that I had said, please ensure you disclose that report. But I did not. And there is a part of me that felt these were very, very senior, experienced detectives, and that I would not need to do that.
Well, the